And good morning, good morning. How's everyone doing? It's Dr. Roddenberry coming to you from my home office in Willow Springs, North Carolina. Hopefully it looks like we have somebody on the broadcast. If you're there, go ahead and check in and say hello this morning. How you doing? It's good to see you. Thanks for coming to the broadcast. It's always great to have people. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat bar. Something I'd like for you to take a look at. Boom, right there. At your convenience, go ahead and click on that link and take about 35 seconds to watch that video. I think you're going to find it quite interesting. It's actually it's a newsreel. Back in the old days, in your great-grandparents' time, they didn't have a lot of news programs and a lot of TV shows. So people got their news by going to the movie theaters. And before you would go to before the movie would come on, there would be several newsreels, which were stories about the happenings in that day. And the link that I sent you is a newsreel introducing the birth of a computer, the brand new technology that was created in the late 1940s. And this computer is going to be very interesting for our lecture today as we talk about cognitive psychology. Hello, whoever my viewer is. Thanks for coming in today. I just shared a video in the chat bar link that describes, there's a video in the chat bar link that I just shared. It's a newsreel describing this new invention in the late 1940s, the invention of a computer. Go ahead and watch that video. I think you'll find it quite interesting. Good morning, Gustavo. How you doing? Did you get a chance to look at the video I put in the chat bar yet? Did you get a chance to look at that? Hopefully you did. If not, take a moment and look at it. Okay, now, why is that important? Okay, well, today we're talking about cognitive psychology. Good morning, Louis Tapia. Good morning. How are you doing? Fantastic. Looks like we have 4, maybe even 5 people here. I've just shared a newsreel link in the chat bar. It's kind of historic interest and also interesting to today's lecture. It's a news story about the invention of a new piece of technology in the 40s called the computer. And it sort of represents a very epic turning point in the history of cognitive psychology. Good morning, Maria. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming today. We're getting ready to talk about cognitive psychology today. So we're going to be talking about human beings as information processors. We're going to be talking about a specific model of the memory called the Atkinson and Shiffren model of memory. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use what we know about memories to create more durable long-term memories. That is, improve your memory so that you don't forget things, right? Now, if you'll remember the last couple of days, I've been talking about behaviorism, and I suggested to you that these behaviorists weren't very interested in humans as information processors. According to a behaviorist, I know how the environment changes. I know how this affects people's behavior. There's no need to worry about anything going on in the mind, if there is even anything going on in the mind. Well, there were a lot of research studies that began to demonstrate that we needed to consider the mind, that maybe we were losing out on something because behavioral psychologists were not focusing on mental processes and intellectual processes. But what really kicked this movement off was the invention of this amazing piece of technology in the late 1940s called the ENIAC. And it was the first fully digital computer, and it could calculate a row of figures in less than a second, as that video suggested to you. And this computer made it plainly obvious to everybody that we needed to start thinking about human beings as information processors. Okay, so before that, your behaviorist would have said, well, we don't have systematic processes in the brain that process information and make calculations and do stuff like that. But when somebody invented a computer that could actually do that, an electronic brain, if you will, that really interested a group of psychologists who began to form their own ideas about studying mental processes. And the goals of these people became that became known as the cognitive psychology approach were pretty simple. They wanted to describe the rules that govern human information processing. How do we use information? How do we store information? How much information can we store? How quickly can we use information? They wanted to understand the rules that govern human information processing. If you will, they wanted to understand what the operating system, what the program was that underlied human mental functioning. They wanted to describe the capacities and limitations of these processes. How much stuff can you remember? How quickly can you remember? What kinds of things do you remember? What kinds of things are more difficult to remember? And so they wanted to understand the capacities and limitations of these mental processes. And then more recently, they've tried to explain how these mental processes are controlled by neurons and connections among neurons. So we're now interested in trying to understand the biology of thinking. And you know, one of the things that cognitive psychologists want to do is to use this logic to see if they can build a computer that can think like a human being. They want to create this thing called artificial intelligence. Okay? One of the differences between you and a computer is you can take in experience and get smarter. Most computer programs, like your laptop, it's as smart as it's ever going to be the day you bring it home from the computer store. But human beings can learn based on how you type into them, how you process information into them. And so cognitive psychologists are interested in seeing if they can create the same thing in a computer. And so the cognitive approach sort of has these four interests. We want to figure out the rules for how people process information, the limits and capabilities of their system, how this system can be explained by the neuroanatomy and biology of our brain, and is there a way to create a computer that really thinks like a human being? So these are sort of the approaches of the cognitive psychological approach. And I will tell you that cognitive psychology is the dominant force in psychology right now. Every person doing research in psychology is relating it to this thing called cognition or information processing. Almost every model, if you go for therapy, you're taking cognitive behavioral therapy. If you're in the biology department, you're doing cognitive neuroscience. I'm a social psychologist, and what rules in social psychology right now is this thing we call social cognition, how the presence of other people makes us think. In the developmental psychology programs that study little kids, they're all interested in cognitive development. Cognition is the most important field in psychology right now. Now, it's based on this analogy of the computer, and if you see over here in the lower left-hand part of my screen, I have sort of a description of what computers do. We know that computers receive input. You type into your computer, right? You put information into your computer. Your computer then processes that information. You have a set of programs that process that information. If you push 2 plus 2, your computer can process that and give you the right answer, which is 4. Okay? And then we know that your computer, when you ask it for information, it will output this information to you. All right? So human beings, we assume, if you start with the assumption that human beings do the same three things, we can begin to build a model of how the mind works. What we're going to talk about, though, with humans is we're going to use these three words: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding means getting information into your system, If you notice something, it's encoded into your mind, into your conscious awareness. If you are able to stick something in your brain and retrieve it later, we say you've encoded it in your long-term memory. Storage is keeping the information in there. I'll bet each and every one of you who are an American student probably can tell me who the first president of the United States was. Who can tell me who the first president of the United States was? If you can, that is because you A, stored that information in your mind, and you are now B, able to retrieve that information. So we know that human beings encode information into their conscious awareness. They store information in their mind. And we know that human beings at some point retrieve that information from their minds. So this is sort of the basic model of the cognitive process. Okay, we understand that there are a set of rules that human beings go by when they process information. There are certain abilities and limitations of this system, and this system engages in three basic activities: encoding information, putting it in the brain, using that information and storing that information, and then retrieving that information. Oh, here's what I want you to do really quickly. I want you to do a task for me. I want you to read a set of letters. I'm getting ready to give you a reading task. You're going to read these words left to right, top to bottom. Here's the trick, though. Washington, you are right, Gustavo. Here's the deal, though. I do not want you to read the word that is spelled out. Instead, I want you to read the color of the ink, okay? So for our next task, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a list of words. There's about 12 words, and they're in rows. I want you to read left to right, top to bottom. But do not read the word. Instead, read the color of the ink that the word is presented in. Does everybody understand that task? Does everybody understand that task? So I want you to read, but I want you to name the color of the ink rather than read the word. All right, here we go. Ready, set, and go. Okay, now, if you will, what did you notice? So it was red, blue, green, yellow, green, black, blue, red, yellow, black, yellow, blue, green, red, black. What did you notice about this task? What did you notice about this task when you tried to read these letters? Can somebody tell me? Was it easy or was it hard? Was it easy or was it hard? I messed up sometimes, didn't you? And why did you mess up, Gustavo? Explain to me why you messed up a couple of times. It's very tricky, isn't it? It was somewhat hard. Why? What was your brain wanting to do? What was your brain wanting to do instead? If you didn't know how to read, you could just say the colors, but you know how to read, and your brain has been trained to pay attention to the words, right? Instead of the actual color. Your brain has been trained to read the words and not necessarily pay attention to color. That's the first lesson that I want to introduce you to about your mind. We actually have a part of our brain, our mind, we're going to call the sensory memory. Information comes into your eyes even before you are aware of it. Sensory memory is the preconscious memory store that serves as a filter. And what it does is it allows you to look at something and decide what it is you want to pay attention to. So, when you were looking at these words, two things were coming into your sensory memory: the color of the ink that the words are written in, and the semantic information of what these words mean were both coming into your mind. And your mind was trying to decide what you were going to pay attention to. What I want you to realize is that those two pieces of information are always coming into your mind. Things are coming into your mind, but you are deciding what things you will pay attention to and what things you are not going to pay attention to. All right. So actually, there's a part of your mind where things come into your sensory awareness and are encoded in your mind even before you are aware of them. This is called your sensory memory. Your sensory memory is this filter that you have where you decide what it is you're going to actively focus your attention on. Okay? Now, your brain has developed the habit of paying attention or encoding word meaning rather than word color. And the Stroop effect that I just showed you demonstrated that. As you opened your eyes and looked at these stimuli, these words, you saw both the color of the ink that they were in and also the words that they spelled out. And you were asked to try and pay attention to the part of the stimulus that you don't usually pay attention to, which is the ink color rather than the semantic information. And the fact that you were having difficulty was because these two competing pieces of information were trying to get into your brain at the same time. All right? This is what we would call the Stroop effect. Now, do you folks remember the dancing bear demonstration from a couple of weeks ago when we talked about consciousness in chapter 3? How many of you watched the people pass the basketball, people in white pass the basketball, and did not even notice the bear? Did any of you not notice the dancing bear? If you didn't notice the dancing bear, that's because of this sensory memory. Your brain filtered the bear out. Even though it walked right across your eyes, your brain filtered it out. Okay? So when we engage in inattentional blindness, whenever we have change blindness, whenever we don't notice that things are changing, it's not because they're not in our mind, it's because they are not making it into our conscious awareness, but they are already in our mind. They're in our sensory memory. Now, what are the limits of this particular part of our mind? It is very quick. Information comes into your mind and only stays in the sensory memory. It's encoded in the sensory memory for 1 second. And then it disappears. So research has shown is that you can ask somebody to search their memory for something that disappeared, and as long as it disappeared less than a second ago, they can see it even though it's gone. Same thing with auditory sensory memory. You actually keep things in your sensory memory for up to 3 seconds. Now, if you decide not to pay attention to those things, they will disappear out of your memory. But there's actually a part of your mind where things go before you are even aware of them. And your visual images go there and stay for just a second, and your auditory images go and stay there for about 3 seconds. And what that does is that gives you, the human being, time to decide what it is you want to pay attention to. That's what's called a sensory memory. Now we have a second set of processes that occur too. After you decide to pay attention to something, it comes into your conscious awareness. What you're thinking about right now is in your short-term memory. Now, you just heard me say the word sensory memory, and you probably still know what a sensory memory is. That's because you are actively thinking about it right now. The short-term memory is the part of your mind where information is being actively manipulated or rehearsed. As you are thinking about, let me give you a phone number. Remember this phone number, 555-1212. Keep that in your mind, 555-1212. All right? Are you thinking about that phone number? If you are rehearsing that information in your short-term memory. It's actually in your short-term memory processes right now. Can anybody tell me what was that phone number I asked you to remember? Go ahead and type it in the chat bar. Let me know what phone number you remember. What phone number did I ask you to remember? Let's see if anybody can remember. Look at that, 555. Very good, Gustavo. And you know what? As long as you continue to think about that number, it will stay in your short-term memory because you are actively rehearsing it. And so that's what's known as your short-term memory. What you're thinking about right now, right? What was that animal? Actually, no, I'll come to that in a little bit. Now, here's the deal. Your short-term memory is fairly limited. You can really kind of keep somewhere between 5 and 9 things juggling around in your mind at any one time. So let's say I need you, Gustavo, to stop by. Oh, you're going to see your family in Dominican Republic this weekend. I need you to take some things to your mom for me, okay? I need you to take this soap that I bought her. I need you to take this deodorant that I bought her. I bought her some candles. I bought her a shirt. I bought her some rubber duckies for the bathtub. I bought her a flag for her front yard. I bought her a pair of shoes. I got her a pair of socks. And then I also bought her a cover for her steering wheel and a wallet. Gustavo, what are the things that I want you to take to your mother for me? Can you tell me what things I just asked you to take to your mother? How many of those things can you remember? Let's see, there's soap, deodorant, there is a flag, right? A steering wheel cover. What else did I want you to take? Some candles, soap, a pair of socks, cover for the steering wheel, and a wall of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How did you remember all of that, Gustavo? Wow, Gustavo's got a pretty good short-term memory. Most people are going to, how many was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. Typically, most people can remember somewhere between 5 and 9 events. Gustavo's pretty good at that. But that's what's known as your digit span or your memory span. If you've ever had somebody give you a list of groceries to pick up from the grocery store and you've forgotten something, you've probably done so because your short-term memory has been stressed out. Okay, now look at this picture over here. One of the things they find is that when you give somebody like Gustavo, oh, he was typing while I was talking. Oh, I was going to be impressed with you, Gustavo. How many of those would you have remembered? I remembered about 6 of them, and I'm the one that made up the list. I did soap, deodorant, candles, shirt, the flag, cover for a steering wheel. I got 6 of them, right? Okay. Now, here's the deal. If you were not like Gustavo writing those down, and you were more like me trying to remember what I said, you probably didn't remember more than about 6 or 7 items. There you go, probably around 5. That's what's known as your magic number. Okay, most people can remember somewhere between 5 and 9 items. The magic number is 7 plus or minus 2. And what he suggests is that we can juggle about 9 chunks, 5 to 9 chunks in our mind at any given time. Now, if you give somebody like Gustavo or me more things than we can keep in our short-term memory, what you're going to find is that we tend to forget the things in the middle of the list rather than the things at the end of the list. So Gustavo, I remembered the soap and the deodorant because those were the first 2 things on the list. I remembered the steering wheel cover and the wallet because those were the last 2 things on the list. But I completely forgot that I told you that I wanted you to pick up a pair of socks and a pair of shoes for your mom, because those were in the middle of the list. And what you're going to find is this serial position effect for any time you stress somebody's short-term memory by giving them a list of too many things to think about. What if you remember less than 5? You know what? I'll bet you, Marcella, I caught you off guard with this particular demonstration. But if I gave you a chance and said, okay, get ready, I'm getting ready to do that list, you would probably remember at least 5. I'll bet I just caught you off guard and you didn't know you were doing a memory test. But you know, there are individual variations in people's digit span. Some people have better abilities to remember lists than other people's. And you know, they actually measure your digit span on modern IQ tests. We're going to be talking about modern IQ tests next week. And one of the things that they measure as a part of your IQ score is the size of your short-term memory. So they actually give you lists of words to remember, and they see how long a list of words you can remember. And that's a demonstration of your digit span or your memory span. Great question, Marcella. There are individual differences. Now, if you want to, one of the neat things that scientists have learned about the short-term memory is that you can artificially inflate its size if you use a concept called chunking. It turns out that you can actually keep 5 to 7 chunks in your mind, but those chunks themselves can be any size. They can be one word, like soap or deodorant, or I could chunk those two and say hygiene supplies, right? So soap and deodorant both are hygiene products. I can bundle those together, and I could come up with socks and shoes as 2 different words, or I could say footwear. And so what you can do is, if you're given a long list of things and you want to learn how to remember them, what you do is chunk your smaller words into larger concepts. So soap, deodorant, and a rubber duckies, and candles. Think about those. Taking a bath, you have a rubber ducky, and you have candles. Soap and deodorant make you smell good. So smell good, taking a bath, shirt, pair of shoes, pair of socks. Getting dressed after your bath, right? Flag, steering wheel, and wallet. I don't know how you put those together, except maybe you have a flag on your steering wheel, and it's you use a flag to cover your steering wheel, and it has a wallet, a picture of a wallet on it. So instead of trying to think about all those individual words, I think cleaning products or hygiene products, which is deodorant and soap. Then I think about bath products, which is candles and a rubber ducky. Then I think about clothes products, which is a shirt, a pair of shoes, and a pair of socks. And then I think about covering my steering wheel with a flag that has a picture of a wallet on it. So what you can do is you can learn how to increase, Marcella, if you want to learn how to increase the size of your short-term memory, learn how to chunk things together, right? So IQ tests do evaluate your short-term memory. They call it your digit span. So we have these 2 parts of our mind. The first is the sensory memory. It's where stuff goes when you decide what you're going to pay attention to. It acts as a filter, allowing things to come into your mind, but you don't necessarily pay attention to them. So you didn't see the moon walking bare. However, if you decide to pay attention to something, it moves from your sensory memory. It is then encoded into your conscious awareness or your short-term memory. Now, this short-term memory can only keep a certain number of things in it, a chunk of things in them. And as long as you're thinking about something actively, it's going to stay in your short-term memory. Oh, by the way, can anybody tell me, what was that phone number again without looking at the chat bar? What was that phone number I asked you to remember earlier? Can you remember that? Can you remember that? Or is it gone now? Is it gone now? Oh, Lewis, you cheated. Y'all looked up at the top. Okay. Did you cheat or did you know it? Okay. Now, sensory experience is not encoded properly into the long-term memory store during rehearsal will decay around 15 seconds after active rehearsal ceases. Holy cow, boy, I could have written that more poorly. I'm good with numbers. Okay, here's the deal. If you're thinking about something, as long as it's in your mind, you won't forget it. However, if you want that stuff to get into your long-term memory so that you can remember it later, you have to encode it properly during rehearsal. Okay, rehearsal is thinking about something. Depending upon how you think about something while it's in your short-term memory, it has a better chance of getting to your long-term memory. And what is your long-term memory? Your long-term memory is where stuff goes while you're not using it. Think about all the things you know, but you are not actively thinking about it. Can somebody tell me what is the date of American Independence Day? Can anybody tell me what is the special date for American independence? Can anybody tell me what that date is? Okay, you didn't cheat. I was just kidding you, Lewis. Can anybody tell me what day of the year? Holy cow. You weren't always thinking about that. That was stuck in your mind, wasn't it, Lewis? Can anybody tell me what is the date for Christmas here in the United States? What is the day for Christmas? Can anybody tell me what day in America Americans drink a lot of beer and think about Mexico? What's that day of the year when Americans like to drink Mexican beer and think about Mexico? Can anybody tell me what that day is? Can anybody tell me what that day is? I heard it's not important at all in Mexico, but up here in America, what's that one day that we all drink a lot of beer and think about Mexico? Does anybody know? May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. Absolutely. Holy cow. Think about those things. All of those things were in your memory, and you were able to call them into conscious awareness when I asked. Can anybody tell me which person in the Continental Congress, the United States Continental Congress of 1776, said, "Give me liberty or give me death"? I know. I found that out when I traveled to Mexico. I didn't realize what a marketing snafu I'd fallen into. I feel so ignorant as an American sometimes, Lewis. They trick us into things, right? But can anybody tell me what person, what historical figure said, "Give me liberty or give me death"? Can anybody tell me? Come on. Who can tell me that? I'm going to see. Nobody can pull that one up. Patrick. Give me liberty or give me death. Does anybody remember that famous American politician from the Patrick Henry? Very good, Mariah. The Patrick served as a cue, didn't it? All right, now here's the deal. If you encode things into your long-term memory, they are there until you need them. Your long-term memory is your memory. When you talk about being able to remember things or not remember things, you're talking about your long-term memory. Items encoded in this unconscious memory store may be accessed by the short-term memory at any time. And we just accessed several memories. Mariah was able to tell me that Patrick Henry was the guy with the famous quote, "Give me liberty or give me death." Louis Tapia knew that Cinco de Mayo was a made-up Spanish holiday that we have here in America. Mariah knew that December 25th was Christmas. and Lewis knew that July 4th was American Independence Day. You called all of those things out of your long-term memory into your conscious awareness. They were encoded in your long-term memory, and then you retrieved them from your long-term memory, and they became encoded again in your short-term memory, your conscious awareness. Now, here's the thing, some facts about the long-term memory. We are not sure, but we don't know how big it is. So we're going to say it's unlimited because we've never found that person who's learned too much and can't learn anything more. As far as we know, there is no limit to what you can stick in your memory. And in fact, I don't know if you folks knew this, but there are actually memory athletes in the world, people who train their memory, and there are memory Olympics. And you would be surprised at what normal people can memorize in short periods of time if they know how to train their brain. So it's unlimited in size. And you know what? Memories can last a lifetime. When you get to your dying days, you're probably still going to remember something that happened to you in kindergarten. These long-term memories can stay in your memory forever. Here's another thing, though. Sometimes things can be put into our long-term memory that didn't really happen to us. We can have false memories planted into our brains. If any of you remember something that happened when you were 1 or 2 years of age, I guarantee you that memory was planted in your brain by someone else. I'll bet. And finally, the quality of your memory trace depends upon how you think about it in your short-term memory, the quality of your rehearsal. Now, can anybody remember, let's think back to that list of words that I told Gustavo to take to his mom. Without looking back at the list, remember I talked about clothing. What 3 pieces of clothing did I ask Gustavo to take to his mother? Can anybody remember that? Type that in the chat bar if you can remember that. Type that in the chat bar if you can remember that. And that pieces of clothing should serve as a memory cue for you. What 3 pieces of clothing did I ask her? A shirt. Pair of shoes and a pair of socks. Very good, Gustavo. Okay, now, I also thought about some smell good products. What are the 2 products that I suggested that would help the smell? 2 things. Okay. And there you go. And then I thought about thinking about taking a bath. What 3 things related to a bath? I only remember 2 of them now. Oh, it was only 2 things. I'm sorry. Do y'all remember what 2 things for a bath did I say? Do you remember? 2 things for a bath. Rubber duckies, very good. And candles for a romantic bath, okay? Now, what I'm trying to do by asking you to remember those things, we've quit thinking about them, okay? We quit thinking about them several minutes ago. So they're gone from your short-term memory. What I was trying to do was to figure out if they had gotten to your long-term memory. Now, because we thought about them in terms of categories, you had a better chance of sticking them in your mind. So when we thought about clothes, we put the shirt, the shoes, and the socks together as one outfit. We related them together. We engaged in what's known as elaborative rehearsal. We related those items to one another and to what we know people wear when we say they're wearing clothes. We elaborated those things. When I asked you to think about the things that smell good, we elaborated odor control in human beings, and we do that with soap and deodorant. And so you were elaborating or relating those things to other things in your mind. Okay? Now, here's the deal. If you want to get something into your long-term memory, you have to think about it a certain way while it's in your short-term memory. What you need to do is you need to relate it to things that are already in your memory and things that make sense together. All right. Now we're going to differentiate that from maintenance rehearsal. You know what a lot of people do when they study their notes? I don't know if any of you study for your exams, but some people, when they study, they will just read their PowerPoints or their notes over and over and over again. They'll just read their notes over and over again. If you're just reading things, then you are engaging in what we call maintenance rehearsal. And that's just keeping the number in your head just by repeating it over and over. And what you're going to find is that when you engage in maintenance rehearsal, things don't get into your long-term memory quite as well as they do if you elaborate or relate those things together. So, what I'm going to talk to you about tonight are some memory strategies that you can use to help improve your memory abilities. You need to read and write at the same time. Fantastic. Okay, basically, if you're reading and writing at the same time, you're encoding it in different parts of your brain, Marcella, and that is going to help you. Or if you imagine it in your mind, absolutely. Wow, Marcella, you must have a really good memory because imagining things as pictures is much more effective than imagining words. Wow, very good. Those are great things for your memory. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to put this all together into a model of how the mind works. Take a look at this picture here. This is a three-part memory storage system called the Atkinson and Shiffren model. Okay, now this is sort of a representation of what I've been talking about today. We have these three parts of our mind. You have this thing called a sensory memory, where things get into your brain even before you are aware of them and allows you to decide what you're going to pay attention to. All right, if you decide to pay attention to something, it then goes into your short-term storage, your short-term awareness, which is where things are while you are actively rehearsing or thinking about those things. And then if you are able to encode something, to use elaborative rehearsal to encode something successfully in your long-term memory, then it is there waiting for you whenever you want to access it again. So this is a model for how the mind, we think the mind works in general. So you get sensory input, it's encoded into your sensory memory. You have about a half a second to a second to decide whether or not you're going to pay attention to that information. If you decide that you're not going to pay attention to that information, that unattended information is lost to you forever. If you decide to pay attention to it, you then encode it on your short-term memory store. Your short-term memory store can only hold so many things at one time, 7 plus or minus 2 items, and you can rehearse those items as they're in your short-term memory. Now, if you rehearse them well, if you engage in elaborative rehearsal, then that information will be encoded into your long-term memory where you can access it later. If you don't rehearse it properly, that information will disappear out of your short-term memory about 15 seconds after you quit thinking about it. Okay? Now, if stuff gets into your long-term storage and is there, a lot of times we are not sure. We think you may have what we call retrieval difficulties. Now, retrieval difficulties are different than storage difficulties. Storage difficulties means you did not get it into your long-term memory. But I will tell you there are lots of things that are in your long-term memory that are there, but you just need a little bit of help getting them out. Let me give you this really cool demonstration. Without saying it out loud, How many of you know the capital of the state of Idaho? Anybody ever heard of Idaho? There is a state capital in Idaho. Please don't type it in the chat bar, but see if you can think about it in your mind. If you think about it. Now, chances are you probably can't remember that. But if I was to do this by saying, look at this, what about, does this serve as a cue? Does that help you? Does that help you remember the capital of Idaho? Right? That's because that information was in your long-term memory. You just needed a little bit of help accessing that memory. If anybody knows where the capital of Idaho is, you can go ahead and type it in the chat bar now. Okay? Let me know somebody out there knows what the capital of Idaho is. All right? So here's just sort of a table representation of what I'm talking about. Boise, Idaho. Very good, Gustavo. All right, so here's a graphic representation of that model which describes what each parts of the mind can do. And what I want you to do for the exam and for the homework is I want you to know the functions of the storage, the duration of the storage, and the capacity of the storage. All right, so your sensory storage, things will last maybe a second or 2 seconds. You can get a bunch of sensory input in, but you can only pay attention to so much. Your short-term memory is kind of small, okay, but you can keep stuff in there indefinitely unless you stop thinking about it. And then in those cases, information is going to disappear after about 20 seconds out of your short-term memory. And if you're lucky enough and think about something correctly, it will be encoded in your long-term memory, and it may stay in your long-term memory forever. Okay? Now, how to improve your memory? What you need to do is to understand how your memory works and leverage that. So your brain loves images. It loves storing things as images, as combinations of things. So what you can use is you can use the power of schema associations in the temporal lobe of your brain. How many of you have ever heard of PEMDAS? Anybody know what PEMDAS is? You probably learned that in a math class. Does anybody know what the acronym Every Good Boy Does Fine stands for? Oh yeah, it's the order of operations, right? Lewis, it's the order of operations. And Every Good Boy Does Fine is the treble clef, the notes in the treble clef. There you go, Gustavo, fantastic. You know what? How about please excuse my dear Aunt Sally? Oh, PEMDAS, right. Okay, fantastic. Your teacher used that as a memory trick. All you do is you have to think of PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, this old lady, and say please excuse this old lady. And that's going to help bring that stuff out of your long-term memory. It helps encode it in there through elaborative rehearsal, and it makes it easier to get that information out. Now, our Marcella brings up another great point. The temporal lobe is evolved to store images, not words. If you think about it, words are relatively new in human civilization. Words are less than 10,000 years old. Your brain has been remembering things for millions of years. So if you really want to remember something, create a vivid image instead. And I'm going to say use emotions too, because your memory and your emotions are tied together. Your amygdala is attached to your hippocampus, which is responsible for memory. Your amygdala marks things so that you can remember them, because it is evolutionarily adaptive to think about, to remember things that have an emotional impact on you. So if you want to remember something, turn it into an image, especially an image that is funny. Okay, so thinking about my dear Aunt Sally is kind of funny. Oh, I wish my, oh well. my screen is blinking out in brightness, and I'm not sure why. So use visual imagery. Use funny, vivid images, scary images to help you remember things, all right? And then finally, you probably don't believe this, and I might even try to do it tonight. Your hippocampus, the part of your brain that is responsible for memory, is responsible for location too. Because if you think about it, one of the most important things of memory is for you to remember where things to eat are and where water is. Two very important things for survival. Memory was adapted to help you survive. And so location is a very important part of memory. And so your hippocampus not only records memories, but it is super good at recording locations. And so what you can do, in fact, there's a video in your course resources that I highly suggest you watch by a fellow named Luis Angel. He's a former community college dropout who turned into a straight A student and a memory athlete competing in memory Olympics, because he learned how to use the method of location. And so what you can do is you can create locations in your world that you are familiar with. So I have my rooms in my house, and what you can do is, if you're given a list of things, you can remember them at different places in your house. And then when it's time to remember those objects, you close your eyes and do an imaginary walk through your house, and you will see the objects that you want to remember placed in different parts of your house. I swear to God, it works. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But what you can do is you can use the fact that your brain loves vivid, funny images and combining things together. And all of these cues will help to improve your memory. In fact, tonight, I'm not sure if I wanted to do behaviorism and how to train a dog to turn on the lights, or whether I wanted to do how to improve your memory. I'm not sure which one of those webinars we're going to do tonight. But we're either going to do a memory webinar or we'll do the learning webinar. Okay, so finally, how to improve your memory. Another thing that you need to learn how to do is you need to learn how to study multiple times. The people with good memory, with great memory, realize this one important principle. You can't just study something once. You have to study it multiple times in order to get it truly in your mind. If you study for my exam and you spend 3 hours studying one time and you think you've memorized everything, you are going to be surprised by the amount of stuff that you forget. This fellow named Hermann Ebbinghaus demonstrated that the first time we memorize something perfectly, we lose about 50% of what we learn within 1 hour. This is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and it's represented by this red line down on the far left-hand side of your screen. The first time you remember something perfectly within 1 hour, 50% of that memory trace will disappear. If you really want to remember something perfectly, you then have to come back a second time and memorize it again. And then you're going to forget a little bit that second time. And then you have to come back and memorize it again a third time. And you'll notice that each time you study the same information, you forget less and less over time. And this is a concept identified by this famous psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus. Now, what should this do for you? This means that if you are going to study and try to remember something, you should do it more than one time. Let's say you're going to study 2 hours for my exam. Cool. Study 2 hours. Instead of studying 2 hours one time, study twice, 1 hour each. Actually, instead of studying twice for 1 hour, study 4 times for a half hour each time. And so what research has shown is that no matter how many hours you decide to study, it will be better if you break your study period up into your study time into more than one study period. Right? Because every time you bring something up into your mind and practice studying it, you are engaging in a process we call consolidation. And the more times you consolidate or reconsolidate that material by sticking it into your long-term memory, by bringing it into awareness and trying to put it into your long-term memory and sending it through your hippocampus, the more times you consolidate a memory, the stronger that memory will become. Okay, I'm getting ready to let you go really quickly. Somebody please tell me what items that Gustavo is supposed to take to his mother. Go ahead and type those in the chat bar real quick to see if you remember. What are those 10 items that I asked Gustavo to take to his mother? Quick, quick, quick. Quick, quick, quick. What are they? Can you remember them? I can remember. Let's see. There's I know those 2 things, and then I know those 3 things. Okay, so I've got 7. Then I know, yes, I know all 10 things. Soap, duckies, wheel cover, flag, shirt, socks, shoes, deodorant, candles. Is that it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, 8, 9, and we're missing 1 thing. Socks, shoes, shirt, soap, deodorant, candles, duckies, wheel cover, flag, and, wallet. There you go, the wallet. Okay. All right. Now, so this is the basic idea of memory, how the memory is set up. What we're going to talk about tomorrow is I'm going to talk about limitations of the memory and how your memory is different from a computer. Okay, it's 9:56. It's time for me to get off of this call and get on to my other call. It was great seeing each and every one of you. Have a great day. Don't forget, webinar is at 9 o'clock. At 7 o'clock tonight, and I really hope to see you there. Take care and have a great day. Bye.